Agroecology isn't just a farming practice. It is a transformative approach that addresses food security, climate resilience, and biodiversity conservation every time, everything, all at once. As we journey to Belém, we are co-organizing this webinar with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food and partners and allies, Coalition members and not, who are joining us in the panel today, and many are joining us in the audience as well. So we will look back at last year to take stock of our key takeaways and lessons learned as we collectively prepare for our collective engagement in COP30 in Belém in November. I would just like to remind you all that we have simultaneous interpretation in English, in French, in Spanish, and in Portuguese. So you can click the interpretation button in the lower side of your Zoom screen and choose the language of your choice. The webinar is also being live streamed and the recording will be made available as well, so you could share it with your networks. So without much further ado, and since we only have a limited time, I'm handing over to my friend and my co-moderator, Matheus Zanella. Matheus, over to you.
Thank you, Oliver. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Agroecology and the COP's Insights from 2024 and the Way to Belém. It's a real pleasure to have you all here. My name is Matheus Zanella. I am from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. We are an alliance of foundations, philanthropic foundations working to transform food systems. So as Oliver was saying, in 2024 and in previous years, we have seen some really encouraging progress in bringing agroecology into the global governance of food, and particularly through the 3 Rio Conventions. These efforts, they help to elevate agroecology as a key solution in the fight against food crisis, climate change, biodiversity laws, and many others. We saw agroecology being considered in the global biodiversity framework. It is permeating debates on climate and the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions, and it's being considered in the global debates on land restoration and governance. This year, 2025, we will reach a really important moment, COP30 in Belém, Brazil. This will be the first COP held in the Amazon, a region that symbolizes both the challenges and the opportunities we face in terms of transforming our food systems. It's also a unique opportunity for civic participation. We're going to be hearing voices from the Amazon, from beyond, which we expect will come together to discuss and shape the future of food. I believe, for example, that topics like bioeconomy will take center stage, and decisions there could really make the course for decades to come. Well, we know that now we are operating in a very complex global policy context. It's no secret to anyone. We're observing rising nationalism, rising fascism, climate skepticism, which makes this moment even more critical. So, not trying to be overly dramatic, but really COP30 and 2025 in general is shaping up to be a year of make it or break it for humanity. And when the stakes are so high, the potential for minimum change is also high. Today, we are very fortunate to hear from some very incredible speakers who will share their insights on the progress we're observing advancing agroecology globally over the past years and their expectations for COP30 and the road ahead. I hope their points inspire us, challenge us, and help us thinking moving forward. So without further ado, let me get started. I will introduce all the speakers all at once to save time for us. And also the institutional affiliations. We're going to be hearing from Jasmin Hundorf, which is Head of Sector, Program Resilient Rural Areas at the German Corporation for International Cooperation from Germany. You also already heard from Oliver, our dear friend and coordinator of the Agroecology Coalition. We also have Charlotte Pavageau, which is Senior Program Manager at the Biovision Foundation. Haseeb Bakhtary is Lead Consultant of Climate Focus, and Belén Citoler, Director of the World Rural Forum, a global organization representing family farmers. We also will be hearing from Fernanda Machiaveli, which is the Executive Secretary of the Brazilian Ministry of Agrarian Development and Family Farming in Brazil. So let me start already with you, Jasmin, being the first speaker. I will start with a very simple question. Why is agroecology considered an important pathway for reaching the 3 conventions by the German Development Corporation?
Thank you very much, Matheus, and Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. It is really a pleasure and an honor here to speak on behalf of German Development Cooperation. We are supporting our ministry, the Ministry for Economic Cooperation, BMZ, in the Agroecology Coalition. And we greatly appreciated this collaboration last year in the Rio year with the multiple stakeholders that are present here today, because I think we could really use our different strengths and expertise. And for us at German Development Cooperation, the really new nature of agroecology is really its systemic approach. I think we have been trying to deal with the issues of working in synergies by using the concept of co-benefits or safeguards, but we've learned that it is much more efficient if we really consider it a systemic change from the very beginning. And agroecology for us can exactly contribute not only to the 3 Rio conventions, but also to the Sustainable Development Goals and to the pathways of the UNFSS, the national pathways. So for us, this is really an added value in times of limited resources, and we consider it both for implementing institutions, but also for the governments as an important task to coordinate and use the resources available as efficient as possible. So, sorry. Do I go ahead on the launch or?
Yes, please, Jasmin.
Okay.
Yeah,
I thought you
please.
wanted to ask another question. Perfect. So then it is my privilege actually, because in this collaboration of different members of the Agroecology Coalition, we did something which its importance, I think, is very often underestimated. We not only took part in the 3 COPs, but we also took the way back and really analyzed what has happened last year, so that we can make recommendations based on this for the new COP process. So if you jump to the slide before and another one, sorry, I will tell you when I click, and I will be fast, but I think it's important for everybody to understand. You can find the policy brief that we have been working on together following this QR code and also later. And please go ahead. As a very summary, we can see here that we have analyzed the 3 COPs, UNFCCC, UNCBD, and UNCCD, and we have seen that agroecology by now has been mentioned in the contexts of important documents and decisions of all 3 conventions. And I will only focus on the UNCCD now, and later my colleagues will continue. But just have a look at the last conference in Riyadh, which took place in December. Please, the next slide. How did we manage to get agroecology, such an important concept, recognized in the different official documents? I think it has been a process of these many members of the Agroecology Coalition, from science to policy and also stakeholders on the grounds and governments. And as an example, I brought you a few pictures from the different events we organized in Riyadh. So you can see this here. And on the last slide, please go ahead. We can happily mention, and you find this on page 9 of the document that you downloaded, that it was the first time in Riyadh last year that agroecology was referenced in several decisions of the Conference of the Parties, particularly not only as agroecological practices, but really as a systemic approach. It is recognized in the context of UNCCD as one mechanism to approach sustainable land management and contribute to land restoration, food security, climate adaptation, and resilience. Again, you can see the interlinkages between the objectives of the different COPs. Furthermore, at this COP in Riyadh, an Indigenous Peoples Caucus was introduced, and that is very much in line with the agroecological principles of participation and co-creation. And what has also been something new to this convention is that the COP presidency also established a mechanism for a stakeholder agenda This agenda is called Reared Action Agenda for Healthy Land and Ecosystems for People, Nature and Climate. And in that one, agroecology and the Agroecology Coalition in particular are explicitly mentioned in Action Area 3 of the agenda. So let me finish on that part and hand over to Matheus and Oliver again.
Thank you very much, Jasmin. Very interesting to see very detailed information on how this was adopted and used as an important approach for land restoration and land governance. Fantastic. I'm seeing that we have more than 200 participants. This is really impressive. I actually invite everyone, if you already are thinking about questions for our panelists, you have both the chat option where you can engage with the audience. I'm seeing that many of you are already introducing yourselves, but also please use the Q&A. It's a different box. It's also in the same, how to say, bar that you can look at it. And we're going to be trying to track this Q&A so we can identify questions for the panelists and also questions that we could reply there directly. All right, Oliver, let me turn back to you. I know that you have 3 colleagues on your side, your virtual side. Maybe that's a good moment for bringing them into the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Matheus. And thanks very much, Jasmin. Agroecology has started to get some traction in the biodiversity space as well, with the explicit reference to agroecology under Target 10 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So at this point, we shift from UNFCCC to CBD. I'd like to ask Charlotte Pavageau of Biovision, how do you see agroecology being taken up in the UNCBD processes? And what are some of the policy recommendations that can be put forward to further integrate agroecology in CBD, particularly in the light of the National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan development process? Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you, Oliver. And indeed, the Convention for Biological Diversity and its Global Biodiversity Framework is really one of the most interesting framework for agroecology. As you just mentioned, this Target 10 remains to date the most prominent and comprehensive text that recognizes agroecology among the 3 Rio conventions. But at COP16 in Cali, we witnessed some incremental but still interesting progress that can further enable an agroecological transition under certain conditions. And I would like to share 4 key developments we saw in Cali. The first one is related to indigenous people and local communities who gained a stronger voice with the establishment of a new permanent subsidiary body dedicated to their traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices in biodiversity conservation. Why is it important for agroecology? Because let's remind ourselves that IPLC are the forefront of agroecological practices, and such permanent body could help to nurture agroecological knowledge. The second development is related to the saying, measure what matters. As part of the GBF monitoring framework was introduced a new indicator on land tenure, particularly an indicator that's going to track land use change and land tenure in IPLC territories. And more importantly, these indicators is meant to be monitored in collaboration with IPLC, which can strengthen transparency and accountability. Again, why is it important for agroecology? Such monitoring framework can help on the long term securing rights and fair land tenure for agroecological land. Third development, it's related to finance. There was a lot of disappointment in Cali around the non-agreement on a global biodiversity fund, but there was a creation of what's called the Cali Fund that is a major step towards fair benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information. So this fund still has a lot of uncertainty on how it can how it's really going to work out, but it can potentially support local structure, local projects related to agroecology. In particular, agrobusinesses are meant to contribute to this fund. And then finally, beyond the international negotiations, we saw quite some significant progress at the national level. We see a number of national biodiversity strategy and action plans that explicitly include agroecology, either as an important approach, either as part of national goals. And there we have countries such as Colombia, a number of European Union countries, or countries like Burkina Faso that are starting to integrate agroecology into their biodiversity commitments. So now how do we move forward from this? By we, I mean some organizations here under the umbrella of the Agroecology Coalition identified 6 recommendations to ensure that agroecology continue to gain traction in those conventions. The first one is to pursue strategic opportunities within those global negotiations. And in particular, if we focus on some of those key work streams we just mentioned, the Riyadh Action Agenda, in climate, we have the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint One on Agriculture. And another interesting process in the CBD is the work on policy coherence. So we need to engage in those processes. Secondly, the second recommendation is to engage with national governments and non-state actors. They remain the key actors that can translate those global commitments into concrete actions. It's important to engage in NBSAP, NDC, and NAP development. As you might be aware, this year is an important window of opportunity for the update of NDC. And there's still a lot of countries that haven't updated their NBSAP as well. So it's important to be part of these processes to bring agroecological voices and agroecological interventions. The third one, we are back to the questions of indicators. In those negotiations, there is really a lot of discussions on what are the right indicators we need to measure at the global level or at the national level. And a lot of countries are asking the question, what would be a good indicators for agroecology? So we need to have a standardized indicators that could contribute to the 3 conventions at once, and that could highlight environmental and socioeconomic co-benefits. And I think we don't have a clear consensus of what this indicator is are for the moment. And then quickly, the last 3 recommendations. As part of the Rio Conventions, you have a web of financial mechanisms. We need to really being sure that the new emerging financial mechanisms are explored and that we harness it for agroecological transition. The third one is to provide really concrete cases that show the potential of agroecology for biodiversity, climate resilience, and land restoration at once. So we need here to have strong evidence on the 3 aspects altogether. And finally, the last point is really key to agroecology, and you know it all very well, is to keep fostering a multi-stakeholder approach, fostering participation of women, youth, LPHC, smallholder farmers and pastoralists, and other actors involved in food system in those global processes. It means supporting these actors in one way or another to engage in the COP or in those Rio Conventions processes. If you want to read more about those recommendations, please check out the brief. The QR code was shared earlier, and I'm sure it's going to be shared in the chat as well. Oliver, back to you.
No, thanks very much. It's been very interesting to see how agroecology is really being amplified more and more in biodiversity. But let's see whether that is also the case in the other COP. So we will be jumping from climate to biodiversity, no, from desertification to biodiversity, and then we go to the climate. Let's hear from our next panelist. If based on his engagement last year at the Climate COP in Baku, if agroecology was also in the radar of those who were discussing, participating, and negotiating. So let me turn over to Haseeb Bakhtary of Climate Focus. Where is Haseeb, where is agroecology in the UNFCCC process, if at all? And as someone who has worked with a number of organizations, both members and non-members of the coalition, advocating for food systems transformation and agroecology, what are you taking away from the various conversations in COP in relation to agroecology, not only in Baku, but particularly in Baku last year?
Thanks, Oliver, and thanks for having me here. It's lovely to see all the participants, and the number is growing, as you said. Unfortunately, the role of agroecology and food systems more generally has not been adequately considered in the UNFCCC processes and decisions. And where considered, the focus has been mostly on climate change adaptation and not mitigation. But we know that food systems account for a third of global emissions, and agroecology and food systems transformation provide at least 20% of mitigation needed to stay on track to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. So there is no doubt that food system transformation through agroecology is a prerequisite if we want to meet the Paris Agreement targets. Nonetheless, there are some important milestones for agriculture and food systems broadly in the history of UNFCCC. One key one is the Cancun Adaptation Framework adopted in 2010, which encourages countries, especially developing countries, to implement adaptation strategies in key sectors, including agriculture and water and so on. Secondly, the Paris Agreement itself, adopted in 2015, emphasizes the importance of addressing climate change in a way that does not threaten food production. So here again, implied sustainable practices, implied regenerative practices. But the main milestone, or a major milestone for food systems and agroecology, was COP28 in Dubai. That because there were two key official outcomes: the global stocktake, which the text was adopted in Dubai, and the text itself explicitly mentions or calls for integrated approaches to land management, to sustainable agriculture and resilient food systems. So here is the first official decision by UNFCCC parties and Paris Agreement parties that mentions food systems and resilient food systems. In addition to that, it calls for taking a more systemic approach, focusing also on supply distribution and promoting regenerative production methods on the ground. Again, implied here is an agroecological approach to food systems. The second decision in Dubai was the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience, which was an implementation framework kind of for the global goal on adaptation. The global goal itself was part of the Paris Agreement, but the decision to develop that further for implementation was only realized in Dubai. And this global climate resilience framework includes 7 thematic targets, one of which is, again, sustainable and regenerative agriculture. So here again, there is a focus more on systemic approach and agroecology in general. In addition to those, there are other decisions: the Cornevia Joint Work on Agriculture, the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work on Agriculture, which are more focused on building knowledge bases and sharing knowledge among parties on agriculture as a sector to build climate resilience. Coming back to agroecology, none of these decisions I mentioned actually explicitly mention agroecology. They all mention sustainable, resilient agriculture or food production. But it is clear from IPCC, from IPBES, and from evidence, empirical evidence from the ground, that sustainable and resilient agriculture is the outcome of agroecology. Once we make agroecology a reality, we transform our food systems, and on the other side, we'll have sustainable and resilient food systems that meet the need of people and the planet. So adoption of agroecology is a prerequisite to achieving climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as sustainable development goals in the agriculture sector. And this is increasingly being recognized by parties, by countries, by national governments, and by subnational governments. For example, last year, ahead of COP29, we looked at 140 countries' NDCs to see how sustainable food systems and agroecology are considered. The majority of them include measures for sustainable agriculture, and 19 updated NDCs explicitly have measures for agroecology, which is an improvement compared to 9 in 2022. So again, showing growing interest in agroecology as a climate and food system solution by parties. Now coming back to Baku, Unfortunately, Baku had less focus on food and agriculture compared to COP28, because COP29 was focused more on climate finance and the new climate finance goal, or the new collective quantified goal, the NCQG, which was adopted, 300 billion per year from public sources, and an ambitious target of raising 1.3 trillion a year from all sources by 2035. Unfortunately, this is a vague target, doesn't give any details on the sectors that it will cover, let alone with including agroecology or sustainable food system. So that was a missed opportunity, and we need to increase climate finance for food systems and agroecology, because as of now, only 1.5% of international climate finance is going for food system interventions. The whole package of texts and outcomes from Baku contained very small references to food systems, and that was mostly on Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on implementation of climate action on agriculture and food security, as well as a global goal on adaptation. But that being said, every year when I attend COPs, especially the climate COP, I see a growing number of pavilions focusing on food systems transformation, and growing number of side events from civil society on agroecology and sustainable food systems. And the result of these initiatives is that there is a lot more recognition of the role of agroecology and food system transformation at the national level by countries and at the subnational level. So my personal hope is that moving forward, these will, from bottom-up, using a bottom-up approach, they will put pressure more at the international level on these UNFCCC mechanisms to include agroecology as a systemic approach to fix climate change in the agriculture and food systems. I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, Haseeb, for your insights insofar as the climate COP is concerned. As we can see, there are different levels of, agroecology and food systems conversations is gaining different levels of traction in different COPs, which makes it really important for this year as we collectively engage in climate COP in Belém towards the end of the year. Before we turn over the floor to our next speakers, I'd like to also remind all of us that there is a Q&A box in there, so you could ask your questions. And we also invite our panelists to respond to some of those questions in writing, although we'll open up the floor later on so we could hear some of the response to the questions that are being asked over there. Let's just complete the landscape and let's hear from actors on the ground who are really trying to make a dent in advancing food systems transformation. I'll call on first Belén Citoler from World Rural Forum. Belén, let me ask you this question. Frontline food systems actors are key for mobilization of ambitious actions in food systems transformation. What are family farmers and the World Rural Forum's main expectations and objectives at COP30?
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to say first that it is a pleasure for me to be here with so many friends and supporters of agroecology. This is really great. And answering to your question very, very briefly, Oliver, our expectations for COP30 are high. Brazil is a country with a strong commitment to agroecology and family farming. I'm sure that the Vice Minister, Fernanda Machiaveli, will explain later. So we are confident that COP30 will be a landmark for family farming. And I like a lot the previous presentations. I would like to congratulate the Agroecology Coalition. We've been running through all the allies in the COPs now. So congratulations for your efforts to ensure that agroecology is greater integrated into the 3 Rio conventions. From our experience on the ground, when a farmer is working on his or her farm, he or she is not really thinking about whether their activities contribute to the Convention on Biodiversity, climate change, or desertification. No, in fact, they contribute to all. So that is precisely the reason why last year we engaged in the 3 Rio COPs. It was the first time that family farmers were present as a delegation in the 3 COPs, and we took the floor in the main high-level events with 3 key asks. First, a greater recognition of family farmers as strategic partners, not just beneficiaries. We are in the halfway of the decade of family farming, which means there's a recognition at the international level of the key role of family farming in food system transformation and the biodiversity conservation. Second, we need supportive policies to scale up sustainable practices and the transition to agroecology. And third, we need to improve the direct access of family farmers to climate finance. And of course, we will definitely bring these messages to COP30 as well. And how are we going to do that? What do we expect from COP? We aim to ensure a wide representation of family farmers organizations. That is why the support of institutions like the Global Alliance and others is so important in facilitating participation of frontline communities at COPs. It is very expensive to attend COPs, and this is really very important for family farmers organizations to be able to attend. And we will focus our work in two key directions. We see that there are like two streams, no? The presidency's agenda and the negotiation process. Regarding the presidency's agenda, we would like to count on a dedicated day and a space for family farming at COP30. And we need to advance in the implementation of the previous presidential initiatives on food systems. We have the FAST partnership that the World Rural Forum, we are members of the board. There's the Emirates Declaration on Food Systems, the Harmonia Initiative. These are good commitments, but we need to translate them into real impact on family farmers and greater implementation and commitments. And regarding the negotiations, we are members of the farmers' constituency. So another key priority is to ensure that family farming is better integrated in key discussions, such as the Global Goal on Adaptation, the Loss and Damage Fund, or the Sharm el-Sheikh program that was mentioned. And let me tell you that family farmers, we are preparing for COP30. And I'm very happy to announce that the World Rural Forum is organizing the pre-COP of family farming in Brasilia in the first week of June. We will share with you more details soon, but we have this important moment to coordinate, align our efforts, and prepare ourselves strongly for COP30. And finally, I would like to highlight that this is a long journey. Of course, we are looking at Belém, but with an eye on the way ahead too. So our goal is to promote the continuous engagement of family farmers in the climate agenda, not just at COPs. And to achieve this, we need to continue strengthening family farmers' capacities to engage in climate discussions and their representation in the negotiation processes of the 3 Rio Conventions. There's a farmers' constituency in the Climate Change Convention, but there's no specific space for family farmers in the other two, and we need to improve and continue working on that. And also something that was mentioned about the relevance of the national level, ensure that the NDCs, the NAPs, the MSAPs, the land restoration plans, so many things happening at the national level, incorporate family farming. We need to improve direct access of family farmers to climate finance and avoid fragmentation and working in silos. That's something that you are doing very well with agroecology. And we think that from family farming, we can also contribute to your efforts. That is why family farmers are calling for a global fund for the resilience of family farming across the 3 Rio Conventions. And we really need the support to transition to more agroecological practices. And initiatives like this webinar are very important. So congratulations to the organizers. And looking forward to further collaboration for this COP30. And in general, we see a lot of interest in the webinar. So it means that we are many that want to unlock the full potential of family farming and agroecology. And we believe in shaping a new world. So thank you, and looking forward to collaborating with all of you.
Thanks very much, Belén. Indeed, farmers and farmer organizations are in the front and center of food systems transformation. I see now, and I very much welcome also Minister Machiaveli, who is with us today. So before we turn over to one of the representative from the private sector, I hand over to my co-moderator Matheus to introduce our next speaker. Matheus, over to you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Before, I just want to recall that we have translation to Portuguese, so I'm going to switch to my native language as well. I ask those who are following in English to also click in the box for translation. Bom, muito bem-vinda, secretária, prazer tê-la aqui conosco. E eu tenho algumas perguntas para trazer na discussão. Eu vou fazer primeiro duas e depois tem já algumas perguntas muito interessantes no nossa caixinha de perguntas com relação ao tema de bioeconomia. Mas deixa eu primeiro colocar aquelas que nós havíamos conversado. Basicamente, tentar entender o que o MDA está fazendo no Brasil, no que tange a formulação e implementação de políticas de apoio à agroecologia, e também sobre as expectativas e engajamentos para a COP30, né? A Belém comentou sobre as diferentes formas de você influenciar o processo, seja no processo negociador, na agenda de chefes de Estado, até mesmo a cúpula dos povos. Se puder comentar um pouco sobre esses dois pontos, a gente agradece. Muito obrigado.
Bom dia, Matheus. É uma satisfação estar aqui com vocês nesse seminário. Também quero cumprimentar o Oliver e todos os demais painelistas que estão aqui juntos nessa discussão tão fundamental, que é aproveitar a COP aqui no Brasil para que a gente consiga dar evidência para a importância da transição agroecológica como resposta também para as mudanças climáticas. Nós elegemos durante esse mandato do presidente Lula a transição agroecológica como uma das prioridades para o desenvolvimento rural. Então, nós lançamos no ano passado um Plano Nacional de Agroecologia e Produção Orgânica, que já é o terceiro plano que é editado no Brasil. Eles são planos de 4 anos, envolve um investimento de 2 bilhões de dólares, 9 bilhões de reais, em assistência técnica para mudanças de práticas produtivas, para práticas produtivas agroecológicas. Também envolve, neste plano, ações como organização das redes territoriais de agroecologia, um investimento direto em organizações da sociedade civil que promovem e auxiliam agricultores a adotarem práticas agroecológicas. O plano ele também envolve uma ação que está em curso, que é a implementação de uma estratégia para redução de uso de agrotóxicos, o Pronara. A estratégia como um todo vai ser lançada agora no mês de março, de forma que a gente substitua agrotóxicos que já são, inclusive, banidos em outros países, mas ainda são utilizados no Brasil, e que seja reduzido mesmo a quantidade, a forma como se usa agrotóxicos aqui no nosso país, e que a gente adote práticas mais resilientes. A agroecologia é a nossa saída principal. Para completar, o plano ele também envolve formação de agentes de ATER, de extensão rural, que sejam capazes de orientar processos de transição agroecológica, e o restauro de áreas degradadas a partir de sistemas agroflorestais e variedades nativas e produtivas, né, que gerem renda para as famílias que vivem nas florestas a partir das suas áreas de preservação. Então, é um conjunto de ações que vão amparar os 5 milhões de estabelecimentos rurais no Brasil, e 4 milhões deles da agricultura familiar, para fazer esse processo de transição nas práticas produtivas. E nós entendemos que isso precisa estar pautado dentro da COP. Para nós, especialmente aqui no Brasil, que já temos uma matriz energética limpa, né, onde mais de 90% já é de energias de matriz renováveis, eólica, solar, hidrelétricas especialmente, enfim, o nosso grande desafio é a questão dos sistemas agroalimentares, né? Como nós conseguimos manter uma ampla produção de alimentos sem comprometer os nossos biomas, sem aumentar o desmatamento, sem mudar o uso do solo. E como a gente também consegue tornar a nossa agricultura mais resiliente às mudanças do clima. E nesse aspecto, a agricultura familiar é um ator-chave para as nossas respostas. A agricultura familiar já tem, né, em pequena e média escala no Brasil, já apresenta formas produtivas mais sustentáveis. Já adota, já tem uma propensão, uma tendência maior a adotar práticas produtivas agroecológicas, até por conta do custo que envolve fertilizantes e insumos químicos. Então, os agricultores familiares adotam práticas com mais frequência. Os povos e comunidades tradicionais no Brasil, eles já são guardiões da nossa biodiversidade, protegendo nossas sementes, protegendo o conjunto dos alimentos nativos e a variedade dessa produção. A agricultura familiar também produz uma quantidade muito maior de variedades, de culturas do que o agronegócio. E, nesse sentido, tem sido nossa aposta para desenvolvimento de sistemas mais sustentáveis de produção, ao mesmo tempo que sejam mais resilientes, inclusivos e saudáveis, no sentido de ofertar alimentos saudáveis, livres de agrotóxicos, para alimentar as famílias no nosso país. Isso tudo nós vamos dar evidência na COP. Como? Primeiro, estamos batalhando para ter um dia específico para dar visibilidade para a questão da agricultura familiar. O segundo ponto, pautando o tema da agroecologia, da transição e da transformação dos sistemas agroalimentares nas negociações que vão se dar entre as partes. Também evidenciando essa discussão entre os chefes de Estado, pautando o nosso presidente para trazer esses elementos para a discussão. E, por fim, fazendo com que na cúpula dos povos a gente tenha uma grande presença da agricultura familiar, dos povos originários do Brasil, dos povos tradicionais, para que também essa temática sobre a forma que nós produzimos alimentos e lidamos com a natureza também tenha uma parte significativa nos temas que vão ser abordados ali naquelas discussões. Então, essas são algumas das estratégias. Por fim, a gente quer mostrar como é possível alimentar a própria COP com produtos da agricultura familiar, produtos agroecológicos e da sociobiodiversidade. A gente está ofertando e organizando essa oferta de alimentos para que a gente também tenha ali uma alimentação, uma oferta de alimentos saudáveis, oriundos da própria região, para os participantes da COP, pautando isso também como uma outra forma de pensar grandes eventos no Brasil. Então, tem uma série de ações que estão em curso e a gente convida vocês da coalizão também para estarem junto conosco, desenvolvendo essa pauta, pensando as estratégias de intervenção, para que a gente consiga dar bastante evidência para essa temática na discussão que vai se dar em Belém nesse ano no Brasil.
Excelente,
isso,
muito
em geral,
obrigado.
Oliver, Matheus, fica aberta para as discussões e para as perguntas.
Tá bom, eu tenho uma pergunta que, na verdade, foram três que foram já colocadas pelos participantes, que eu acho que são muito interessantes. É sobre a relação do tema de bioeconomia. A gente sabe que a presidência da COP do Brasil tem trazido esse tópico como um dos tópicos prioritários e existe uma certa interação entre o tema de sistemas alimentares, agroecologia e bioeconomia. Mas tem também uma certa preocupação de que, depender do caminho que esse tema é tratado, ele pode, na verdade, ser contraproducente aos princípios que nós, da agroecologia, temos defendido. Existe uma certa preocupação no setor com relação a isso. Então, a pergunta simples é como que a gente poderia tentar casar a agenda da agroecologia dentro do tópico da bioeconomia. Foram três colegas que colocaram isso no nosso box de perguntas.
O termo bioeconomia ele também está em disputa, né? Uma disputa semântica que reflete também as nossas visões sobre o que é o desenvolvimento sustentável. Aqui nós adotamos uma perspectiva da sociobioeconomia, entendendo que nós precisamos sim fortalecer as cadeias da sociobioeconomia, que envolve as populações tradicionais, que envolvem a agricultura familiar, e temos feito uma série de estratégias para que essas cadeias consigam acessar mercados públicos, para que a gente também tenha um fortalecimento da entrada desses produtos e da renda que é gerada para os agricultores familiares quando estão desenvolvendo os produtos da sociobioeconomia na Amazônia e nos demais biomas do Brasil. A discussão da bioeconomia ela vai além disso, né? Na própria estratégia, ela envolve também abordagens sobre como a indústria e outros atores entram nesse debate e na construção de formas mais sustentáveis de produção. O que a gente está construindo aqui, junto com o Ministério do Meio Ambiente, é essa abordagem, que é entender que nós precisamos olhar também o desenvolvimento, a abordagem ambiental e abordagem sobre a mudança do clima, envolvendo os atores que estão dentro dos biomas, que vivem da floresta, que protege a nossa sociobiodiversidade e também gerando renda para essas famílias, para essas populações. Está aqui a GIZ participando, nós contamos com apoio fundamental, por exemplo, da GIZ, no programa que nós temos de bioeconomia e cadeias de valor, que é implementado na Amazônia e que já faz com que agricultores familiares se organizem para acessar mercados públicos e para acessar o crédito, para continuarem mantendo formas sustentáveis de produção em harmonia com o bioma da Amazônia. E isso é uma das nossas abordagens que nós entendemos que é possível conectar com um debate sobre agroecologia. Quando a gente está falando da agroecologia, a gente está também falando sobre um conjunto de práticas, além de um conjunto de valores que envolvem a preservação dos biomas, que envolve práticas mais sustentáveis, que envolve sistemas agroflorestais, que envolve o conjunto da diversidade dos atores que compõem a agricultura familiar, os povos tradicionais, e é nesse teor que a gente tem feito essa abordagem, essa participação dentro do debate de bioeconomia. E eu acho que o que vocês forem aportar, a gente também vai levar para dentro das discussões, né? Porque eu entendo que é uma maneira, é um termo que consegue agregar um conjunto mais diverso de atores, né? Atores que, por exemplo, a gente agora no G20 não conseguiu trazer todo mundo para adotar o tema da agroecologia. Nós trouxemos no debate do grupo de agricultura essa discussão. Tinham termos que alguns países que não concordavam em utilizar a agroecologia como o único caminho. Então, foram abordados outros meios e a bioeconomia foi uma das, vamos dizer assim, dos termos que conseguia fazer com que países diferentes chegassem num denominador comum. Eu entendo que isso também está dentro dessa estratégia, né, da gente conseguir ampliar o debate e ir chegando em um conjunto maior de países que compartilham os mesmos princípios.
Ótimo. Bom, muito obrigado. Let me switch back to English and give a few seconds for those who need to click on the button. Because I'm seeing lots of questions in the chat. I'm seeing also that some of the panelists are already trying to answer the questions directly. But let me turn back to you, Oliver. Maybe you can take a few others and also bring other people to the speaking list. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Muito obrigado, Matheus, and Minister Machiaveli. Muito obrigado. Before we continue, I'd like to call on one other person from the private sector, because that's often there are questions arise from that side. And I'd like to call in at this point Walter Link, who is the co-owner of the now 145-year-old industrial group Big Green. And he co-founded over 30 years ago the first sustainable business alliances across Europe, North and South America, with other business owners and multi-stakeholder leaders. And one of the focus of Now Partner Foundation, which he co-founded, is really to work on at international scale innovative forms of regenerative agriculture, agroecology, and forestry. Walter, how is the private sector getting involved in advancing agroecology and food systems transformation agenda?
First of all, Fernanda, great to see you and everybody else. Let me say that I think we need to be clear about our goal. And I think the goal needs to be to make agroecology and the social bioeconomy the new mainstream of land use. And how can we achieve that? I think we need to, first of all, see how can we scale agroecology implementation on the ground. How can the public sector support that with policy and financing? And then how can the private sector also contribute financing and also supply chain integration so it becomes part of the market? And I think we have to remember farmers are business leaders themselves. They also are part of the market. And we need to help the farmers with the right agroecology approaches to be more successful as business people while they're also having all these regeneration impacts. And I think this will propel the social bioeconomy to become more and more of the mainstream. And I think you were talking about COP here, of course. And there are the official negotiations, and they're very important, but they're also slow because every country has to agree on everything. So a very important additional part of COP are the non-negotiated outcomes where governments, certain governments, civil society, private sector can work together to advance the implementation of agroecology and to support the financing and market integration. And so over the past years, we have, of course, like you, been very active at COPs. And I think in Belém, we have really a possibility to demonstrate concrete solutions of how this is already working, because we're not talking about something in the far future. We're talking about something that's already happening on the ground, but most people don't know that it's happening on the ground. They think agroecology is some kind of non-profit hobby, and not already a very successful methodology in which farmers make more money, in which countries develop sustainably, and in which other private and public sector actors can benefit.
No, thanks very much, Walter. It's really important to make sure that we don't leave all the negotiations and discussions in the hands of the government and civil society. Let's make sure that private sector is equally engaged and accountable in terms of really pushing for and doing things in the food systems transformation side. I see there's a lot of questions there. What, in the interest of time, what I will do is to ask the 2 or 3 questions from the Q&A and invite any of our speakers to respond to whatever question that they wish to respond to. The first question I could see here is from Marie Cosquet. How do you think there may be synergies between a push for a just transition and a push for agroecology, both at COP30 and in NDCs and beyond? Another question from Nicole Pita. At the upcoming climate COP, how much traction would it have to communicate about agroecology as a transformative solution to reduce food systems dependence on fossil fuels and agrochemicals? Food systems emissions are often the focus, not fossil fuel inputs in food system. So anybody who would like to take on any of those questions, the synergy part and then communicating agroecology?
Yeah, I can quickly take the synergies one, which I briefly answered in the Q&A chat box. A transition to agroecology inherently implies a just transition in the agriculture and food systems. So the both movements go hand in hand. There is no contradiction. There is no conflict in either in between these two. But I think there is a need for us and for us generally, and advocates of agroecology, advocates of just transition, to emphasize and make this more explicit, that they include each other and they're not conflicting. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Haseeb. Anyone who wants to take up the question around how much traction would it have to communicate about agroecology as a transformative solution to reduce food systems dependence on fossil fuels and agrochemicals? Anyone who wants to take that up? And if no one wants to take that, I will invite any of our speakers to respond in writing to any of those questions. Let me ask another question from an anonymous.
I'm happy to say something. If
Go
nobody
ahead,
else,
Walter.
I didn't want to take the space. I think it's as key because, again, we have to show that we have the better solutions, right? The world does not respond so well to philosophy. It responds to demonstrating what works better on the ground. And agroecology can outperform chemical agriculture in all regards. In the same way as we can also bring in other forms of energy. But at the moment at COP, most of the conversation is about energy. Mm-hmm. But energy can actually only reduce emissions. It cannot sequester carbon. So agroecology is the key solution that we need to bring forward at COP, and to help people broaden their perspective, to include energy, which is very important, but to also include land use, because the solution is in the integration of the solutions and not focusing only on one or the other.
Thanks very much, Walter. One last question. I mean, agroecology can be such a difficult term for average consumers to understand. What are the panelists' thoughts about how to effectively explain agroecology as a real, tangible solution to consumers, especially to consumers who are more focused on efficiency?
I can take my hat off,
Go
moderator,
ahead,
and try to
Matheus.
address that one because we are seeing a lot of action in that front. Well, the best way to explain it is through examples. And I think Brazil is organizing together with many partners in the ground this example of feeding the participants of the COP with the kind of the future of food that we are looking for. So I would encourage everyone to show examples when explaining how we do it. And the power of examples is the same power of mobilization. We're not going to be able to explain agroecology in academic papers, or it has to be on people being eaten and being fed by agroecological production.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. I see that we only have 1 minute left. And at this point, I'd like to thank all of the participants who managed to join us today. We still have like triple digits in terms of participants. And thank you very much to all our speakers for sharing your thoughts. The documents that were mentioned today will be shared after this call. You could also take a photo of the QR code. And thanks very much. And I hand over to my co-moderator, Matheus, for your closing.
Well, nothing else to say, just a big thank you for all the panelists, for all the more than 200 participants who have joined us. This is the beginning of a long journey, so we invite everyone to follow us in this journey. The Global Alliance for the Future of Food, Agroecology Coalition, many members will be doing a lot of action towards COP30. So please keep yourself updated and hope to see you in Belém. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado. Thanks, everybody.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. Bye.